He became rich overnight. 7 years later, he realized his fortune was paid for in blood. And tonight, the sea came to collect. That night, the southern waves roared like dancers in an ancient ritual. Arkan stood alone on the shore, his feet wet with black water retreating into the dark. Wind whipped through his thinning hair as his trembling hand gripped a black cloth given to him by a nameless old man. He didn't know where the man came from, only that he emerged from the fog like a shadow peeled from the wall of time. Above, the half-moon hid behind gray clouds, casting a dim glow that made Arkan's silhouette stretch unnaturally long. He took a deep breath, then pricked his little finger with a rusty iron blade. Blood dripped onto the cloth, soaking in like dry earth drinking rain. Arkan wasn't a fool. He was an economics graduate from a top university, once employed by a major corporation, but fired during the economic crisis. Now he was drowning. Debts piled high, his house near foreclosure, his wife pregnant with their first child, and all he had left was shame burning in his chest. His village whispered of legends, people who became rich overnight, traders who flew private jets, officials living in luxury with no visible career. All pointed to one thing, the Pesugahen of Nai Roro. At first, he laughed. But when Pact, a once jobless neighbor, suddenly owned 5 cars and 3 mansions, Arkan began to believe, and tonight he chose to try. The black cloth began to move in his hands, as if alive. His blood spread, forming ancient script he couldn't read, letters twisting like snakes across the fabric. Then, from the distance, the sound of the waves changed, no longer a roar, but whispers. Hundreds of female voices singing softly, faintly, from the ocean's depths. Arkan turned, but saw no one, only a long shadow on the sand that wasn't his, a woman with long hair standing far down the beach, wearing a long green dark garment. She didn't move, but Arkan knew she was watching, studying, testing. His breath caught. He wanted to run, but his feet felt rooted in the sand. "You come with intent," a voice whispered, not in his ears, but inside his skull. Not just money, but power, honor, revenge. Arkan didn't answer, only nodded weakly. "Do you know the price?" the voice returned, soft yet piercing. "Every 7 years, you must surrender one soul, blood from your blood. If not, all you have will vanish, and you will become mine forever." Arkan swallowed hard. Who must I give?" The voice chuckled. "I choose, not you." Before he could protest, the black cloth lifted into the wind, floated toward the sea, and vanished into the waves. When Arkan returned home, dawn was breaking. He thought it all a nightmare, but when he checked his phone, notifications flooded in. "Your account has been credited with 2.5 billion RP. He froze. His heart pounded. The money was real. He wept, laughed, fell to his knees on the floor of their tiny room. His wife woke, confused, then cried too when she learned they were no longer poor. But beyond the window, between the swaying coconut trees, the woman in green still stood, watching, smiling faintly, and on Arkan's phone screen, though no notification appeared, a single message flashed and vanished. 7 years, all wait. 7 years passed like a dream too beautiful to be real. Arkan was no longer the trembling man on the shore. He was a tycoon, owner of mall chains, hotels, and factories across 3 islands. His wife gave birth to 2 children. They lived in a luxurious villa atop a hill, guarded by armed security and electric gates. But every night, Arkan never truly slept. He always woke at exactly 007 for no reason, and each time he felt something watching him from behind the curtains. Not a thief, not a night guard, something calmer, something patient, as if it already knew his time was running out. He tried to laugh it off as stress, past trauma, but deep down he knew that message wasn't a dream. 7 years, I'll wait. At first, wealth brought joy, but slowly, Arkan's life felt like a stage play. He spoke at seminars with a fake smile, donated to orphanages with cameras rolling, but behind it all, a hollow emptiness gnawed at him. He began seeing things, mirrors that didn't reflect his image for a few seconds, family photos where a woman in green always appeared in the background, even though no one had taken her picture. His eldest daughter, Dinda, often spoke of a long-haired grandmother who visited her room at night. Arkan forbade her from talking about it. He didn't want his children to know what he had done. He didn't want them to know the price of everything they had. Then, 3 days before the 7th anniversary, their housemaid vanished. No trace, no message, just a tidy room. And one strange detail: all the mirrors were covered with black cloth. Police said she fled due to unpaid wages, but Arkan knew better. That night he saw it on CCTV. The woman walked slowly toward the swimming pool, stood at the edge, staring into the water. Then, from beneath the surface, pale hands emerged, dragging her in. No splash, no scream. The footage disappeared the next morning. Arkan wanted to erase it all, but a voice echoed in his head. "Don't run. I'm already here." He collapsed to his knees, praying silently. "Whom must I give?" he whispered, tears streaming. "Take my money. I have a young child. My wife is sick. Don't take them." There was no answer, only silence that cut deep. But the next morning, Dinda, his 8-year-old daughter, collapsed at school. Doctors were baffled. Her heart was healthy, but her body was limp, her eyes open yet unresponsive. In the hospital, as Arkan kept vigil, he noticed something on the heart monitor screen. Every time the needle hit the number 7, the screen flickered, and for 1 second, the face of Nai Roro appeared. He screamed, called the nurses, but when they arrived, the screen was normal. "You must be exhausted," the doctor said. But Arkan knew this wasn't exhaustion, it was a warning. On the eve of the 7th year, Arkan sat in his study staring at the ocean from the high window. He wrote a will, then burned it. He couldn't run, couldn't escape. His money couldn't save him. He stared at the family photo on his desk, himself, his wife, Dinda, and her baby sister. He whispered, "I won't give any of them." But when he turned to the mirror behind him, his reflection was gone. In its place stood a long-haired woman, smiling gently, standing behind his chair, and her voice echoed softly, as if rising from the seabed. "You already promised, and your blood I have already claimed." The words echoed in silence, seeping through Arkan's skin like cold water. "Your blood I have already claimed." He twisted around, breath ragged, heart pounding as if it might burst. But the mirror behind him was empty. Only the dim room, the soft glow of the lamp, the reflection of his own pale face. No long-haired woman, no pale hands reaching. And yet, on the mirror's surface, droplets began to appear, sliding down like seawater dripping from wet hair. Arkan stumbled back, fell from his chair, knocking over the desk, trophies and papers scattered. He wanted to scream, but his voice was trapped in his throat. On his laptop screen, still on, the security camera feed suddenly switched to live view. Dinda, who should have been asleep in her room, was standing at the front door, unlocking it with small hands, then walking toward the beach. Arkan jumped up, ran to her room. The bed was empty, the blanket neatly folded as if never used. He shouted for his wife, but she lay deep in sleep, hard to wake, as if under a spell. He grabbed his car keys, rushed to the garage, but every vehicle was dead, batteries drained, though fully charged that afternoon. Finally, he decided to run down the hill to the shore on foot. Rain began to fall, the road slick, wind howling from the south. Along the way, trees fell across the path, streetlights flickered and died one by one. When he reached the beach, Dinda was already standing at the edge of the waves, her small feet wet, her hair swaying gently. Before her, A tall figure in a green dress stood on the water's surface, not sinking, staring at Arkan with pupilless eyes. "Don't touch her," Arkan screamed, sprinting forward. But Dinda turned and smiled. Not a child's smile. This was cold, adult. "Father," she said, her voice low, wrong for her age. "I've been here long before. Since the night you pricked your finger 7 years ago, I've belonged to her. Did you think I was just your daughter? I am the first promise." Arkan froze. The world tilted. He wanted to deny it, but he remembered. His wife had been 7 months pregnant when he returned from that beach. Dinda was born 3 months later. And in her first breath, the baby didn't cry. She laughed. At the time, he thought it a miracle. Now he knew it was a sign. Dinda wasn't just his child. She was a vessel, a soul placed to be redeemed. "You're not Dinda," Arkan screamed, tears streaming. "Dinda is still here," the child whispered, her voice shifting back to a child's tone, but trembling as if 2 voices fought inside one body. "But she is weak. I am stronger. I have filled the space you sacrificed, blood from your blood. And now, it's time to go home." She reached out toward the figure on the water. The waves receded, forming a path of wet sand leading into the deep sea. Arkan lunged, pulling Dinda into his arms. "I won't give you up. I'd rather die." But Dinda's body suddenly turned heavy, cold, like a corpse. Her eyes snapped open, completely black. "You died the moment you signed the contract, Father. You just didn't know it." Before Arkan could react, the ground beneath his feet gave way. The sand swallowed his legs, then his waist, as if the ocean itself was consuming him alive. He clawed at a rock, but his grip failed. Dinda stood at the edge, watching him with a mix of pity, anger, and relief. "I love you, Father," she said, her voice pure again like a child waking from a nightmare. "But you made a promise, and a promise with her cannot be broken." Arkan sank slowly, seawater filling his mouth, but he could not scream. The last thing he saw was Dinda walking away from the shore while the green-clad figure vanished into the waves. And deep below, in the darkness, countless eyes opened, welcoming another soul whose time had come. At the bottom of the southern sea, among the wreckage of ancient ships and the ruins of temples buried in moss, Arkan lay, yet not dead. His body did not rot, did not crumble under the ocean's pressure. He could breathe, though his lungs felt filled with wet sand. He stood on the seabed, surrounded by dozens, hundreds of eyes watching from behind black rocks. Not fish, not ordinary creatures. They were the ones who had signed, souls who failed to fulfill their promise, who ran, who tried to cheat. Now they were trapped here, eternal, guardians and prey all at once. Arkan tried to scream, but his voice was swallowed by water. All he could hear were whispers flowing like currents. "You've come too. You've come too." Then, from the unseen depths, a dim green light emerged. It approached slowly, carrying a figure walking across the seabed as if on solid ground. Her hair floated like seaweed. Her eyes were pitch black, yet reflected thousands of faces, victims, the sacrificed, children born from blood pacts. She stopped before Arkan, staring at him with an unreadable expression, anger, disappointment, and somehow pity. "You thought you could protect them?" she whispered, her voice echoing in his skull like a funeral bell. "You thought a father's love could defy a pact with the underworld?" Arkan fell to his knees, the water around him freezing. "I would rather be here, as long as they are safe," he murmured. Nyai Ronro raised her hand. From the distance, Dinda's image appeared, but not the Dinda he knew. This was Dinda older, around 15, dressed in a dark green robe, her eyes just like her own. "Look," she said, her voice sharp, "your daughter was never yours from the moment she breathed. She is the heir. The blood of the Pact must flow. Every 7 years, she must sacrifice a soul, just as you did, just as your father did before you." Arkan stared, horrified. "My father?" "Yes," she whispered. "He signed the same contract on this shore, and when the time came, he offered his child, you. But you survived because your mother stole the black cloth and burned it. You lived, but the debt remained, and you paid it with Dinda." The water around them began to swirl, forming a slow vortex. Arkan felt his body being pulled toward its center, a gaping cave in the seabed, opening like a monstrous mouth. "But I didn't give Dinda," he screamed in his mind. "I protected her." Nyai Roro shook her head. "You did not protect her. You only delayed it. She chose to come, because her blood called for her fate. She is not a victim, Arkan. She is the heir." In the vortex, Dinda waved, not in fear, but like a farewell long foreseen. "I'll be okay, Father," she said, her voice faint. "I'll be stronger than you." And before Arkan could respond, the cave swallowed him whole. On the ocean floor, Arkan did not die. He became one of them, trapped souls who watch, who wait. Sometimes, on Friday Kliwon nights, if someone stands too long at the southern shore and stares too deep into the waves, they may see his face rise from the water. His mouth opens as if screaming, but no sound comes. Only one thing can be heard by those who listen closely. Never trust the promise of wealth, for the pact never ends. It only changes bodies. And in the empty villa atop the hill, the lights still burn. In Dinda's room, the doll on the bed slowly turns its head toward the door and smiles. The doll was no ordinary toy. It was a gift from Arkan on Dinda's first birthday, crafted from smooth dark wood, with hair of braided coconut fiber and glass eyes that always looked damp. Dinda used to hold it every night. Now, it sat on the bed, surrounded by star-embroidered pillows, as if waiting. But tonight, after the villa's lights flickered on by themselves, and the guards fled at the sound of doors opening with no wind, the doll slowly turned its head. Its wooden neck creaked softly like rotting timber, though it had never aged. Its eyes fixed on the closed bedroom door, and from the edge of its carved lips, a smile appeared, one that hadn't been there before. Wider, sharper, like the grin of someone who had just won a long, silent game. Dinda never returned to the villa after that night on the shore. No trace, no missing person report. Arkan's wife, Ratri, lay in a psychiatric ward, screaming that her daughter had been replaced and that rain of blood would fall when the pale moon rose. Doctors dismissed it as trauma-induced delusion, but on the walls of her room, she wrote in her own blood, "Dinda is not my child, Dinda is her house." Meanwhile, the abandoned villa began to live on its own. Lights turned on at midnight, the elevator moved up and down with no wait, and every Friday Kliwon, a child's voice sang down the hall. No lullaby, but a chant in an ancient tongue that made surveillance cameras fail one by one. A paranormal researcher, Boscoro, arrived after hearing the story from the sole surviving housemaid, the one who escaped the incident at the pool. He brought recording devices, infrared cameras, and a fragile copy of an old manuscript on Southern Sea offerings. As he entered Dinda's room, the air turned icy. On his camera screen, the doll wasn't there, just an empty bed. But when he turned, the doll stood at the door, its glass eyes tracking him. Boscoro tried to speak. "Who are you waiting for?" From within the doll, a child's voice answered, yet layered, echoing, as if dozens spoke at once. "The one who will come, the one who will sign, the one who will give blood." Boscoro stepped back, but the door slammed shut. Behind him, the doll walked silently,
tiny wooden feet making no sound. He tried to run, but every window had turned into a mirror, and in each one Dinda appeared, different ages, from infant to woman, all dressed in green, all smiling the same cold smile. At the end of the main hall, he saw her, real, standing there. Long hair, wet, a white dress slowly darkening to deep green. "You came to stop us," she asked, voice soft but cutting. "But you don't understand. This isn't a curse, it's a legacy. Every village, every city needs someone rich, someone who controls, buys, destroys. And wealth must be paid for, with blood, with soul, with family." He raised the manuscript. "I can break the chain." Dinda laughed, but it became a chorus of women singing in unison. The moment Baskoro began chanting the breaking spell from the ancient text, every mirror in the villa shattered at once. Shards hung in the air, swirling like a storm. Dinda raised her hand. From each broken piece, Arkan's face emerged, his eyes full of regret, his mouth open in a silent scream. "Look," she whispered, "my father tried to save me, but his love wasn't strong enough to defy fate. And you, do you have purer blood?" Baskoro tried to flee, but his legs froze. In the last intact mirror, he saw his own reflection, but behind him, a long-haired woman stood fused to his back. And on his palm, unnoticed, a drop of blood welled from his little finger, like an invitation, like the beginning of something more horrible, like a name being written in the dark. The blood from Baskoro's finger fell slowly onto the cracked marble floor, forming a pattern that looked too deliberate to be random, like ancient script rising from beneath the stone. He stared in horror, pressing his finger to stop the flow, but the droplets kept coming, painless, as if the blood no longer belonged to him. In the mirror, the woman with long black hair was no longer behind him. She had merged with him. Her eyes, now his eyes, were solid black. When he screamed, the voice that came out was not his alone. It carried a second tone, deep and ancient, like the echo of the sea. Dinda stood in the center of the room, watching him with a cold, knowing smile. "You came to break the chain," she said, "but you've become its newest link." Baskoro wasn't just a researcher. He was a man who once mocked superstition, a former university lecturer who studied Javanese folklore as cultural myth, not truth. He believed in trauma and mass hysteria, in symbols shaped by fear. But now, something was growing inside his chest. Not fear, but knowledge. Knowledge that didn't come from memory. He suddenly understood the dead language in the burned manuscript. He knew the names of those who had made pacts before: Raden Wijaya, Need Tembang, Pakguru of Mount Lao. And worst of all, he knew the truth. The Pesugihan wasn't just one man's curse. It was a web. A hidden network of power passed through blood and silence, feeding on greed, feeding on sacrifice. And now it had chosen him as the new guardian. That night, as he wandered the shifting corridors of the villa, he saw Arkan emerge from the wall, not as a ghost, but as a warning. "Don't let your blood flow for them," Arkan whispered, his voice choked with seawater. "I tried to save my child, and I lost her. Don't make the same mistake." Baskoro wanted to answer, but his mouth moved on its own. "I have no choice," he said, yet not in his voice. From within his eyes, something else spoke. "My blood was marked at birth. My great-grandfather, he was the first to open the path to the southern shore." Arkan looked at him, eyes filled with sorrow. "Then you're not a victim. You are the inheritance returning." Before vanishing, he touched Baskoro's forehead, and in an instant, every childhood memory twisted. He wasn't an orphan, as he always believed. He was adopted. His real parents vanished on the southern beach the day he was born, and that night every other newborn in the coastal village died, except him, because he was never meant to be ordinary. He was the reserve, the soul prepared to replace the chain when it began to break. And now, with Arkan broken and Dinda rising as the new heir, the underworld needed a new guardian, someone who knew the secrets, who had knowledge, and whose blood had been written long before he drew breath. When Boscoro finally stepped out of the villa at dawn, his face was blank, his eyes no longer fully human. He carried an empty bag, but inside, the ashes of the manuscript had begun to rewrite themselves on a small black cloth he never brought in. He didn't return to his university, didn't write a report. He traveled to a remote coastal village in the south, rented a rotting hut on a cliff's edge, and waited for the first desperate soul to arrive, eyes hollow with poverty, heart starving for wealth, because he knew he couldn't refuse. His right hand moved on its own, carving a symbol into the wooden wall, a circle with 3 drops of blood. And on the first night, when the half-moon rose, a voice whispered from within him, "Call them. It's time to begin again."
Call them. It's time to begin again. The words pulsed inside Boscoro's skull, not as sound but as rhythm, like a second heartbeat buried beneath his ribs. He was no longer the man who once scoffed at ghost stories. He sat in the decaying wooden hut perched on the southern cliff, staring at the churning sea below, knowing it was no longer just water. It was a gate, a witness, a hunger. The walls of the hut were now carved in carvings he never made, symbols that appeared overnight, etched as if by invisible claws. On the floor, the ashes of the burned manuscript had formed a map, not of land, but of souls. Red glowing dots scattered across the islands, marking those who were close to breaking, the desperate, the drowning, the ones who would come. On the 3rd day, a young man arrived, thin, hollow-eyed, clothes torn, clutching a plastic bag with cold rice and a pink slip from a factory. He had heard whispers. At the edge of the south, a man knows how to make you rich. Just come with intent, and the sea will answer. He didn't believe it, but he had no choice. "Are you Boscoro?" he asked, voice trembling. Boscoro didn't turn. He sat facing the ocean, motionless. "I am no one," he replied, his voice low, heavy, layered with something not human. "I am only the keeper, but if you've come to make a pact, the sea has already been waiting." The young man shivered. What is the price?" Boscoro finally turned. His eyes were no longer brown. They were black, like wet obsidian. "1 soul every 7 years, blood from your blood. Fail, and you become food at the bottom of the sea." The man laughed nervously. I have no family." Boscoro's lips curled into a faint, cold smile. "You think that protects you? Blood isn't only born from the womb, it's born from debt, from loyalty, from the one who gave you money, who paid your sister's hospital bill, who raised you when no one else would." The man's face drained of color. How do you know?" Boscoro said nothing. He only extended his hand. On his palm, a fresh wound had formed, a triangle, bleeding slowly, though no blade had touched him. "Sign with blood. Here. Tonight." The wind died. The waves stilled, and from the deep a chorus of women began to sing, soft, endless, rising from the ocean floor. The man nodded. He pricked his finger with a small knife and signed the wooden floor. His blood didn't soak in. It dried instantly, forming the same ancient symbol carved on the walls. In that moment, his phone buzzed. An account credited, RP 1,200,000,000. He wept. He laughed. He fell to his knees. "Thank you. I'll pay everyone back. I'll give my family a new life." Boscoro stared at him, eyes empty. "Go. Enjoy your 7 years. But do not forget who you will give when the time comes." The man left light in his step, hope in his heart, but as he vanished behind the hill, Boscoro whispered into the wind, "The first has come. The chain lives on." That night, the sea roared louder than ever. At the ocean's depths, Arkan stirred from his eternal slumber. He felt the ripple, not an earthquake,
but the pulse of a ritual reborn. From the darkness, he saw Bhaskaro's silhouette rise on the shore, not as a man, but as a giant shadow standing between worlds. Beside him, Dinda stood tall, crowned with coral and fish bones, no longer a child, but a sovereign. They were no longer victims. They were guardians now. Arkan tried to scream, to warn the world, but his mouth filled with sand. All he could do was stare toward the surface, where city lights flickered brighter, lights from mansions built on blood, on promises, on sacrificed souls. And in every rich home, one question would one day echo: what price are you willing to pay for wealth? The question did not come from a voice. It pulsed silently into the minds of those who rose too fast, those who went from nothing to everything in a single breath. What price are you willing to pay? No one heard it aloud, but every new tycoon felt it. A tremor in the chest at 3 a.m., dreams of drowning, reflections in mirrors that blinked when they didn't. In cities, the wealthy emerged like fungi after rain. Former drivers, unemployed graduates, street vendors, now living in penthouses, flying private jets, their names in gold. But behind their smiles at galas, behind their polished speeches, there was dread, regret before the crime, a countdown only they could hear. On the southern coast, Bhaskaro's hut glowed with a dim red light from within, though no power reached it. No villager dared approach. Fishermen saw him standing on the cliff at midnight, arms raised, as if conducting an unseen ceremony. Sometimes ancient drum beats echoed from the shore, though no drum was played. Every seventh day a fish washed ashore, not ordinary, but one with a human face, resembling the latest soul who had signed the pact. But no one spoke, because they know whoever revealed the truth would be the first to be claimed. In Jakarta, the young man who signed now lived in luxury. He bought a high-rise apartment, launched businesses, lifted his family from poverty. But his nights were spent watching CCTV feeds, checking every room. Because every night at 007, the bathroom light turned on by itself, and in the mirror, his brother's face appeared. Though his brother was alive, healthy, had just called him yesterday. He tried to escape, moved cities, changed numbers, but the money kept flowing, and the dreams grew sharper. In them, he stood on the shore. Bhaskaro watched from afar. Dinda whispered in his ear, 7 years isn't long, you'll forget, until she comes to collect. He woke with a wound on his little finger, black blood oozing, never healing. And at the ocean's floor, Arkan watched it all. He was no longer just a prisoner, he was a witness. A soul cursed to see generation after generation fall into the same trap. He saw Bhaskaro now, eyes fully black, standing among a circle of ancient guardians beneath the waves. Dinda sat on a throne of dead coral and shipwreck bones, crowned in sea glass and drowned whispers. They were no longer human, they were institutions, symbols of endless greed. Arkan tried to scream, to warn the world, but his mouth was sealed by kelp and silt. All he could do was write in the sand with a bony finger, "Never trust easy wealth. Fortune without struggle is a debt paid in soul." But the world did not listen. In a luxury hotel room, a woman stared at her phone. A notification flashed. Transfer successful. Rp 5 billion. She smiled, wept, then opened a plain brown envelope left at her door, no sender. Inside, a small black cloth and a rusted iron blade. In the corner, written in red, "Come to the southern shore tonight. Bring blood from your little finger, and bring one name, the one you will sacrifice." She looked at her child's photo on the nightstand, then slowly she nodded, because to her the price still seemed bearable. And far below, the waves stirred, not in anger, but in welcome. The pact never dies. It only waits for the next hand to reach out.